Single gunshot cracked through the humid New Orleans night, and the woman scrubbing floors in the back hallway of Le Réseau did the only thing that made sense. She dropped to her knees, pressed her forehead against the wet tile, and kept breathing. Everyone else in the restaurant screamed. Jolene Reeves just listened. That sound, a suppressed 9mm fired through expensive fabric, told her everything she needed to know before the body even hit the ground. And what happened next? The question a powerful man whispered into her ear, while blood pooled across white marble would drag her into a world she was never supposed to survive. Len had been cleaning the private dining room at Le Réseau for 11 months. The restaurant sat on a quiet stretch of Magazine Street, its exterior deceptively modest, weathered brick, wrought iron balconies dripping with jasmine, a hand-painted sign so faded you could barely read the name. Inside was another universe, crystal chandeliers, imported Venetian tile, tables set with sterling silver and linen so white it practically glowed. The kind of place where a single entree cost more than Jolene made in a week. He was the night shift housekeeper. Not a waitress, not a hostess. The woman who came in at 11 p.m. after the last patron stumbled out, and who mopped the marble floors and scrubbed the grease traps and polished the brass fixtures until her shoulders burned. At 260 pounds, Jolene moved through the world the way large women learn to move, carefully, apologetically, always pressing herself against walls to let thinner people pass. Her wide hips knocked into chairbacks, her thick arms jiggled when she wrung out the mop. Her knees ached constantly, a low grinding protest from years of carrying weight on a frame that doctors kept telling her was not designed for this. She was 26 years old, and she had already made peace with being invisible. The staff at Le Réseau treated her the way service workers treat the cleaning crew. They didn't. The bartender left sticky rings on every surface. Chef tracked grease across the kitchen floor 5 minutes after she'd finished mopping it. The front-of-house manager, a brittle woman named Camille, once told Jolene to use the service entrance exclusively because, and this was a direct quote, "The clientele shouldn't have to see the help squeezing through the front door." Jolene swallowed it. She swallowed all of it, because the job paid $12 an hour and her grandmother's assisted living facility in Gentilly cost $3,800 a month, and the math didn't leave room for dignity. But being invisible had made Jolene something dangerous, observant. She knew that Le Réseau was not simply a restaurant. She knew the private dining room on the second floor, the one with the soundproofed walls and the separate entrance off the alley, hosted meetings that had nothing to do with food. She knew the owner, a thin, nervous man named Bouchard, answered to someone far more powerful, knew the names and faces of men who arrived in armored SUVs with tinted windows, men whose photographs appeared in the Times-Picayune under headlines about indictments and disappearances. And she knew exactly who Sebastián Calderon was. Calderon controlled the port of New Orleans, not officially. Officially, the port was managed by a board of commissioners appointed by the governor. But every longshoreman, every customs inspector, every harbormaster who wanted to keep drawing a paycheck understood the same unspoken truth: the cargo moved when Calderon said it moved. His family had run the Gulf Coast corridor for 3 generations, a sprawling network of shipping, construction, and political influence that the FBI had been trying to dismantle for 20 years without success. Sebastián himself was 41, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark hair going silver at the temples, and a stillness about him that made the air feel heavier whenever he entered a room. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. When he sat in the private dining room, which was every Thursday without exception, the entire staff moved like they were walking through a minefield. Even Camille, who treated Jolene like furniture, became a trembling wreck of "Yes, sir," and "Right away, Mr. Calderon." Jolene had never spoken to him directly. She existed 2 floors and an entire social universe below his line of sight, but she cleaned his private dining room every Thursday night after his meetings ended, and she had learned to read the room the way a detective reads a crime scene. The number of whiskey glasses told her how many men had attended. The arrangement of chairs told her who sat where, who was closest to Calderon, who had been pushed to the periphery. Ash in the crystal tray meant a deal had been struck. Calderon only smoked when he was celebrating. And the nights when Xian found the glasses untouched, the chairs barely moved, the room carrying nothing but the faint scent of cold cologne. Those were the dangerous nights. Those were the nights someone had received very bad news. Tonight was a Thursday, and tonight the room was different. Jolene was in the service corridor behind the kitchen, wringing out her mop when the private dining room door opened above her. She wasn't supposed to be on the second floor yet. She was early, but the kitchen staff had left a disaster zone, and she'd been working her way through it when the sound of raised voices drifted down through the old building's thin walls. She shouldn't have gone up the stairs. She knew that. Survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to stay in the basement, finish her shift, and take the streetcar home to her studio apartment in Trem. But the voices were wrong. In 11 months of Thursday nights, never once heard shouting from the private dining room. Calderon did not allow shouting. The fact that someone was yelling meant the rules had already broken. Jolene climbed the narrow service staircase, held her rubber-soled shoes silent on the wooden steps. The corridor outside the private dining room was dim, lit by a single wall sconce. The door was closed, but the transom window above it was cracked open. The building was old, and the second-floor ventilation had never worked properly. She pressed her back against the wall, 260 pounds of her becoming as still and silent as the plaster behind her, and listened. "You are making a grave accusation, Manny." Calderon's voice, low and precise, like a blade being drawn slowly across stone. "It ain't an accusation if it's true." The second voice was gravelly, agitated, belonging to a man who was either very brave or very stupid. Someone in this room sold the Hernandez route to the feds. 3 containers seized last Tuesday. 40 million in product gone, and the only people who knew that schedule are sitting at this table. "Then by your own logic," Calderon replied, "you are also a suspect." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. She recognized the second voice. Manny Ferris, Calderon's second-in-command. She'd seen him dozens of times, a stocky man with a shaved head and a gold crucifix the size of a child's fist hanging from his neck. He always left his whiskey glass with lipstick-smudged cigarette butts floating in it, which Jolene found personally offensive. "I've been with you 19 years, Seb." Manny's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine hurt. "Was there when your father died. I held the line when the Ochoa cartel tried to take the 9th Ward. You questioning my loyalty? I am questioning everyone." Then a third voice, softer, almost gentle. "Perhaps we should table this discussion. Emotions are running high. The leak will be found, but not like this, not with brothers pointing fingers at each other." Jolene didn't recognize that voice. She pressed herself flatter against the wall, her heart hammering. "Agreed," Calderon said. "We reconvene Monday. Everyone is excused." The scraping of chairs, heavy footsteps. Jolene turned to retreat down the stairs. But her hip caught the edge of an antique console table that had no business being in a service corridor. A porcelain vase wobbled, tipped, and hit the hardwood floor with a sound like a small explosion. The private dining room door flew open. Light spilled into the corridor, and Jolene found herself staring directly at Sebastián Calderon. He was backlit, his silhouette massive in the doorframe, and for a terrifying moment his hand moved toward his waistband. I'm the cleaner," Jolene stammered, her hands raised, still holding the mop handle. "I was coming up to start the second floor. I'm early. I'm sorry I knocked the vase. I know who you are." Calderon's hand dropped. His voice was flat, unreadable. Manny appeared behind him, his face twisted with suspicion. "How long has she been out here?" "I just got here," Jolene said quickly. "I didn't hear anything, I swear. She's lying." Manny stepped forward, crowding the doorway. She heard everything. Look at her face. "Manny," one word from Calderon, and Ferris stopped moving, as if he'd hit a wall. Calderon studied Jolene the way a man studies a problem he hadn't anticipated. His dark eyes traveled over her, not with the usual dismissive sweep she was accustomed to, not the flicker of disgust or the performative blindness. He actually looked at her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Jolene Reeves." "Jolene," he said her name slowly, as if testing the weight of it. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. He stepped past her and moved toward the back staircase, and Jolene's legs carried her forward before her brain could object. Behind them, Manny's voice hissed, "Seb, you can't just. Go home, Manny." They descended the stairs in silence. Calderon led her through the kitchen, past the walk-in cooler, and out the service entrance into the narrow alley behind Le Réseau. August heat hit Jolene like a wall, thick, wet, suffocating, and the distant sound of a jazz trumpet drifted from somewhere on Frenchman Street. A black Suburban idled at the curb. Calderon's driver opened the rear door without a word. "Get in," Calderon said. "Sir, I have a shift to finish." "Your shift is done. Bouchard will be informed." He paused. "I'm not going to harm you, Jolene. I give you my word. Yeah, but we need to have a conversation that cannot happen inside those walls." Jolene looked at the open door of the SUV. She looked at the alley behind her, the dumpsters and broken glass, and the distant glow of Magazine Street. Thought about her grandmother in the Gentili facility, about the $3,800, about the $12 an hour that was already not enough. She got in. Inside of the Suburban was cold enough to raise goosebumps on her thick arms. Calderon slid in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy, hermetic thud. In the dim cabin light, she could see his face clearly for the first time. The sharp jaw, the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, dark eyes that carried an exhaustion most people probably never noticed. He poured a glass of water from a crystal decanter and handed it to her. Not whiskey. Water. The small consideration made something twist in Jolene's chest. "You heard the conversation," he said, not asking. Lean considered lying. She was good at lying, invisibility required it. But something about the way he'd said her name upstairs, the way he'd looked at her as though she were a person and not a piece of the building, made her abandon the pretense. "Yes, all of it. Enough." Calderon nodded slowly. "Then you understand why Manny wanted you dealt with, Ewan. A cleaning woman who overhears a conversation about a federal informant inside my organization is a significant liability one." Jolene's voice was steady, though her hands were shaking in her lap. "I don't know anyone to tell. I mop floors and go home. That's my entire life. I believe you." And somehow, impossibly, she could tell that he meant it. "But I have a different question for you, Jolene." He turned to face her fully. Ewan. In the close confines of the SUV, his presence was overwhelming. Not just physically, though he was easily 6'2", and built like a man who had done manual labor before he'd done power, but in the sheer density of his attention. Sebastián Calderon focused on you. The rest of the world simply ceased to exist. "You have cleaned my dining room every Thursday for nearly a year," he said. "You know what happens in that room. You have heard fragments before tonight. Do not bother denying it. A woman who takes that staircase early, who positions herself in that corridor, is not careless, she is curious, and curiosity in my world is either an asset or a death sentence." Jolene's mouth went dry. "So here is my question." Leaned forward, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You are a poor woman. You scrub toilets for a living. The people in my organization would step over your body on the sidewalk without breaking stride. You owe me nothing, and you owe this world nothing. Hutchinson, if you had information that could destroy a man like me, if you had heard something that the FBI would pay handsomely for, why wouldn't you pick up the phone and trade my freedom for yours?" The question hung between them like smoke. Jolene looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were raw from bleach. Her fingernails were cut short because long nails broke when you scrubbed grout. There was a burn scar on her right wrist from a splatter of hot grease during her brief, disastrous stint at a Popeyes in Metairie. She looked back up at him. "Because the FBI doesn't know my name," Jolene said quietly. "The cops in this city don't know my name. The politicians, the prosecutors, the journalists, none of them have ever looked at me long enough to learn it." She paused. "You did. First night I cleaned your room and left a note on the table that said, "Thank the cleaning woman." The room was perfect. You didn't have to do that. Nobody does that. Something shifted behind Calderon's eyes. Every powerful person I've ever been in a room with has treated me like I don't exist, Jolene continued, her voice gaining a quiet steel. They talk like I'm not there. They joke about my weight while I'm standing right behind them. Indeed, they leave their messes for me to clean. And never once wonder if the woman on her knees, scrubbing their floor, might be listening, might be thinking, might be smarter than every single one of them. She straightened in her seat, and for a moment, the cramped back seat of the SUV felt like a courtroom, and she was delivering a verdict. You asked me why I wouldn't sell you out. The answer is simple. The good people on the right side of the law have never once offered me a seat at the table. You're the first person in this city who bothered to learn that I have a name. So no, Mr. Calderon, I don't pick up the phone, 'cause loyalty isn't about morality, it's about memory, and I remember who saw me when nobody else did. The silence that followed lasted long enough for the air conditioning to cycle twice. Then Sebastián Calderon did something Jolene had never seen him do in 11 months of reading his empty rooms. He smiled. Not the thin political smile he wore at the restaurant, a real one. It changed his entire face, softened the jaw, crinkled the corners of his eyes, made him look, for just a moment, like a man instead of a monument. You don't belong on your knees scrubbing tile, Jolene Reeves. Respectfully, sir, I belong wherever someone's paying me to be. He almost laughed, almost. I have a proposal, Calderon said, his expression sobering. As you heard, my organization has a leak. Someone inside my circle is feeding information to federal agents. I have spent 6 months and considerable resources trying to identify the traitor, and I have failed. My men are loyal, but they are also known. Their faces, their habits, their associations, all of it is documented. I need someone the system hasn't catalogued. Someone who moves through rooms without being noticed. Jolene understood instantly. You want me to spy for Yerv. You already do it instinctively, Spore, the way you read that corridor upstairs. You positioned yourself at the acoustic sweet spot without even thinking about it. You knew where to stand to hear the most while being seen the least. That is not a learned skill. Jolene, that is a gift. It's not a gift. It's what happens when you spend your whole life making yourself small so other people feel comfortable. Then stop making yourself small for their comfort. Calderon said, his voice hardening. Start using it for your own advantage. He laid out the terms. She would attend events as his guest. Galas, fundraisers, private dinners, positioned in plain sight but functionally invisible. Her job was to watch, listen and report. In return, he would pay her grandmother's facility costs directly, provide a furnished apartment in the Garden District, and deposit a monthly salary that made Jolene's throat close when she heard the number. Someone discovers what I'm doing, she said carefully. They'll kill me. They will not discover you. You have been invisible your entire life. For the first time, that invisibility will serve you instead of diminishing you. Jolene stared at him for a long time, thought about the Gentili facility, about the overdue invoices piling up on her kitchen counter, about the letter from the billing department that used the phrase alternative arrangements as a polite way of saying eviction. When do I start? Over the following weeks, Jolene's life cracked open like an egg and something entirely new spilled out. Calderon installed her in a sun-drenched apartment on Coliseum Street, 3 blocks from the streetcar line. It had 12-foot ceilings and a clawfoot tub and a kitchen with a gas stove, which Jolene, who had been cooking on a hot plate for 2 years, stood in front of for a full 5 minutes, just staring. He brought in a stylist, a razor-thin woman from Atlanta named Keegan, who arrived with 6 rolling racks of clothes and an expression that suggested she had opinions about everything. Keegan took one look at Jolene and reached for a black moo-moo. No. Calderon's voice came from the doorway. He hadn't even fully entered the room. No black, no draping, no camouflage. Keegan blinked. Mr. Calderon, with her frame, a structured silhouette in darker tones, would make her disappear. That is the opposite of what I want. He stepped into the room, running his hand along one of the racks, and pulling out a deep sapphire cocktail dress with a plunging neckline and a fitted waist. She walks into a room. I want them to look, and want them to see a woman standing next to me who is not afraid to take up space. Dress her like she owns the building. Jolene stood in the center of the room in a cotton robe, her face burning. 26 years of being told to shrink. Wear dark colors, vertical stripes, empire waists. The universal code for we acknowledge your body exists, but we'd prefer it didn't. And here was the most dangerous man in Louisiana, holding up a sapphire dress and demanding that she expand. To her credit, pivoted instantly. She pulled emeralds and burgundies and golds. She draped Jolene in fabrics that clung and flowed and celebrated every curve, every fold, every inch. When Jolene looked at herself in the full-length mirror, wearing a deep green velvet gown with a slit that showed her thick brown calves, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, because she looked like herself for the first time, without apology. The first real test came at a fundraiser for the New Orleans Museum of Art. The event was held in the sculpture garden, strung with 1,000 white lights, and every power broker in the Gulf South was in attendance. Politicians, judges, shipping magnates, and at least 4 men Jolene recognized from Calderon's Thursday night meetings. She arrived on Calderon's arm, wearing the sapphire dress. The reaction was immediate and exactly what she'd expected. Whispers, sidelong glances. In a silver gown literally stopped mid-sentence to stare. Jolene felt the familiar heat of humiliation climbing her neck. Calderon's hand settled on the small of her back. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. They are looking. Good. By the end of the night, they will forget they ever saw you. That is when you begin. He was right. The initial shock faded within 20 minutes. Jolene was large and quiet and not famous, which in a room full of ego meant she was effectively furniture. Calderon released her into the crowd like a satellite into orbit, and she drifted, finding a bench near the bar, settling her weight with a tired sigh, playing the role of the overwhelmed plus-size companion who needed to rest her feet. Nobody paid her any attention, and so she listened, heard a state senator promise a construction contract to a man whose company was under federal investigation, heard a shipping executive complain about increased port inspections ever since Calderon's last shipment got flagged, and she heard, at the far end of the garden, partially hidden by a massive bronze sculpture of a pelican, a voice she recognized, Manny Ferris. He was speaking on his phone, his back turned to the party, his voice barely above a whisper. Jolene was 12 feet away on her bench, and the acoustics of the garden wall behind him bounced his words directly toward her. It's done. The next shipment comes through on the 14th. I'll make sure the manifest is clean on our end. Your people hit the warehouse after offload, make it look random. Calderon takes the loss, the board loses confidence, and we move on the vote by October. A pause. No, doesn't suspect me. He's too busy playing house with his new pet project. Some fat girl he pulled out of a mop closet. The man's lost his mind. Jolene's blood went cold, then hot, and something beyond temperature altogether, a white noise fury that started in her stomach and radiated outward until her fingertips tingled. Fat girl he pulled out of a mop closet. She didn't move, she didn't flinch, sat on that bench, with her hands folded in her lap, and her face arranged in an expression of pleasant boredom, and she memorized every single word. When Manny ended the call and walked back toward the party, he passed within 3 feet of Jolene. He didn't glance at her, she was invisible. And for the first time in her life, being invisible felt like holding a loaded gun. Found Calderon near the dessert table, entertaining a group of donors with a story about deep-sea fishing that Jolene was fairly certain was entirely fabricated. Caught his eye and gave the signal. A slow touch of her left earring, which meant, I have something. Urgent. Calderon excused himself within 90 seconds. They met in the museum's empty coat check room, surrounded by the scent of cedar and mothballs. It's Manny, Jolene said. Her voice was flat, controlled, but her eyes were blazing. He's coordinating with someone to hit the 14th shipment. He's feeding them the manifest. He's planning to undermine you with the board and force a leadership vote by October." Calderon went very still, kind of stillness that a building has in the instant before it collapses. "You are certain?" I heard him on the phone. 12 feet away, he was behind the pelican sculpture. He also called me a fat girl from a mop closet, so yes, I am absolutely certain, because that particular detail is not something I'm likely to misremember. Something terrible moved behind Calderon's eyes. Not surprise, he was beyond surprise, was the cold, mechanical fury of a man who has just learned that the brother he trusted for 19 years has been holding a knife to his back. "He said that about you?" Calderon's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "That's the part you're focused on. That is the part that tells me everything I need to know about his judgment." Calderon reached out and took both of Jolene's hands. His palms were warm and rough, and they swallowed hers completely. He looked down at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Gratitude, yes, but something fiercer underneath. Something possessive and aching. "You have just saved my family's empire for the second time since I've known you," he said. "The first was when you chose not to pick up the phone. This is the second." "I'm keeping a tally," Jolene said. And despite everything, a small, defiant smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. Calderon didn't smile back. Instead, he cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs tracing the soft curve of her jaw, and pressed his forehead against hers. "I am going to handle this," he whispered. "I need you to stay in the main gallery. Do not leave until my driver comes for you. Can you do that? I've been waiting in rooms my whole life. I'm practically professional at it." He pulled back and the warmth vanished from his face, like a door slamming shut. What replaced it was the mask, the cold, lethal stillness of a man about to do something irreversible. He straightened his cuffs, smoothed his jacket, and walked out of the coat-check room without looking back. Jolene stood alone in the cedar-scented dark, her heart hammering so loud she could hear it in her teeth. She waited in the main gallery for 47 minutes, counted every one of them on the antique clock hanging above a painting of the Mississippi Delta, sat on a velvet bench in front of a Monet, or maybe it was a Renoir. She'd never been to a museum before, and she pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. At minute 48, the gallery doors opened, and Calderon's personal driver appeared. A tall, silent man named Hewitt, who had never once looked at Jolene with anything other than professional respect. "Ma'am, the car is ready." Outside, the sculpture garden was being cleared. Blue and red lights flickered somewhere beyond the museum gates. Jolene heard fragments of conversation as she was guided to the Suburban. "Heart attack, they're saying, collapsed in the parking structure. Manny Ferris, you believe it, he looked fine an hour ago." Jolene climbed into the back seat. Calderon was already there, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his tie loosened, a single drop of something dark on the cuff of his white shirt that could have been wine and probably wasn't. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "It's done?" Jolene finally asked. "It's done." She should have felt horror. She knew that. A man was dead, a man she had identified, a man whose death she had made possible. She waited for the guilt, the revulsion, the moral crisis that should have been thundering through her. Instead, she felt the weight of something settling into place, like a bone finally clicking back into its socket after years of being out of joint. "Was there anyone else?" she asked. "2 associates. Also handled, quietly, and the shipment on the 14th. Will proceed as planned with corrected security." He glanced at her, and something close to admiration crossed his face. "You are remarkably composed for a woman who just facilitated 3 deaths. I'm remarkably composed for a woman who spent 4 years cleaning up other people's messes and never once got a thank you. This is not the hardest thing I've survived, Mr. Calderon. Sebastián." The correction was soft, almost tender. "Sebastián," she repeated, and the name felt like crossing a threshold. 3 days later, Calderon held a meeting, not in the private dining room at Réseau, but at his estate in the Garden District, a sprawling antebellum mansion behind a 12-foot iron gate. Every captain, every lieutenant, every person of consequence in the Calderon organization was present. 2 men and 4 women, standing in the oak-paneled great room, their faces guarded and tense. Jolene stood at the back near the fireplace, wearing a fitted burgundy dress, and her hair pulled into a low twist. She had tried to position herself in the corner out of habit. Calderon wouldn't allow it. "Jolene," his voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Every head in the room turned toward her. "Come here." She walked forward. 26 pairs of eyes tracked her movement, felt every single one of them cataloguing her. Her size, her plain face, her calloused hands. She saw the confusion, the skepticism, the barely concealed amusement on some of their faces. The fat cleaning woman. What was she doing here? Calderon waited until she was standing beside him. Then he addressed the room. 3 days ago, Manny Ferris was exposed as the traitor who sold our Hernandez route to federal agents. He was also planning to eliminate me and seize control of this organization by October. He was not exposed by our intelligence network. He was not exposed by our surveillance team. He was not exposed by any of the men in this room who are paid very handsomely to protect this family. He paused, letting the shame settle like dust. He was exposed by this woman, Jolene Reeves, a housekeeper, a woman who most of you have never noticed, never spoken to, and would not have recognized if she sat down next to you on the streetcar. The room was silent, utterly, completely silent. Infant. Manny Ferris made the same mistake that every arrogant man in this city makes, Calderon continued, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in Jolene's chest. He assumed that because she was poor, because she was heavy, because she cleaned floors for a living, she was beneath his attention. He spoke freely in front of her. He schemed within earshot of her. He dismissed her as a fat girl from a mop closet. A ripple went through the room. Calderon turned to face Jolene. He took her hand, and in front of every person who mattered in his world, he raised it to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "This woman is the reason you still have jobs. She is the reason I am still alive. And from this moment forward, anyone who disrespects her, overlooks her, or speaks about her with anything less than the reverence she has earned, will answer to me personally." He didn't release her hand. He turned back to the room, pulling her gently to his side. "She is not my guest. She is not my project. She is my partner. Yea, and the next person who underestimates her will be the last person who underestimates anyone." Jolene stood there, her hand in his, her heart slamming against her ribs with a force that should have cracked bone. She looked out at the room full of criminals and killers and power brokers, and for the first time in 26 years she did not wish she were smaller. She wished she were bigger. Big enough to fill every room she'd ever been pushed out of. Big enough to take up all the space she'd spent her life apologizing for. Big enough to matter so loudly that no one could ever look through her again. Calderon squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Outside, the New Orleans evening pressed its warm, heavy breath against the windows, and somewhere on Frenchman Street a trumpet played a melody that sounded, if you listened closely, like a woman finally being heard. Loved this story. If Jolene's courage and Sebastián's loyalty hit you right in the chest, then smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done at that fundraiser, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated is a superpower, not a weakness.